I'm Theo.
And I'm Juliet.
And this is Apologies Accepted.
We offer an entertaining look at some of the big issues in history by examining public apologies of the famous and infamous.
We're looking at politicians, serial killers, actors, and you.
Send us a public apology you would like to make, and we'll read it on the air and give you a chance to redeem yourself or just get some guilt off your shoulders.
We're here for you. Once a week, maybe more if you're really, really sorry.
Hi,
everybody.
This is Apologies Accepted,
The podcast.
And I'm not Theo this week.
And I am not Juliet any week.
Ever. And the question of the week is, what's shaken bacon?
So I got sick again, which sucks, and I had 3 days on the couch. My doctor threw all the pills in the world at me, and happily I can get off of the couch and do things. But whatever this is, it is not fun, and it has set up a permanent home in my lungs. So there'll be a lot of sputtering and raspy, more vocal fry than usual, courtesy of bacteria. Yeah, and aside from that, that's kind of it. We were talking pre-show. I saw Casablanca last night, first time ever. How have I never seen this movie? Well, I don't know. And it was charming, and it was corny in the best possible way. Yeah, and the plot holes were huge, but you just drove right through them because it's just a pretend movie anyway, you know? So many times the movie could have ended, but it didn't because somebody looked to the left instead of the right or whatever, right? But it was fun. It was really fun, and I enjoyed it. And I was hoping you were going to say, oh, I've never seen it either, because I'm a smart person who's gone through my life without ever seeing Casablanca. So I was like, maybe she hasn't. And then I was going to say, oh, you got to watch it. This is a great Sunday afternoon movie.
Well, it sounds like fun. Maybe I'll watch it again.
Well, you should.
I'm sorry you're not feeling well. I hope you feel better soon.
Well, I feel like $1 million compared to 3 or 4 days ago. Yeah. So yeah, $500,000 to be honest. But I'm a hero, and here I am. There was a microphone. I heard it click on, and I was like, somebody needs me to talk? Oh. And what about you? What's shaking bacon?
America's hero. So this week, no real bacon. I just worked and went to the dentist. It was not very exciting. I did book my next 2 trips to New York. So there's going to be one in July and one in December. So I should get the miserable heat and then the freezing cold weather, which will be awesome. When I'm sitting here on my couch in San Francisco when it's 70 degrees, I never think about what it will be like to be 99 degrees in 99% humidity in New York City. So I just go ahead and book things randomly. And then when I get there, I'm like, holy shit, what have I done? But I'll worry about that. That's a problem for future me.
That's true.
So I will worry about that then.
And fuck her.
And fuck her, really. She doesn't deserve to be happy or comfortable. When I'm there in the freezing cold this Christmas time, I'm going to finally see the Rockettes like I was going to do last time.
Yay!
Yay. And I will also see Keanu Reeves in Waiting for Godot, which should be a hoot and a half. Either it'll be really great and I'll be really impressed, or it'll be really bad and I'll have a story to tell. So,
either way, you will be in the same room as Keanu Reeves.
I will be in the same room as Keanu Reeves.
Yes.
It's not a huge room either, so I will be able to actually see him, which is interesting.
Yes.
I don't know if I've ever seen any famous people or not, because I barely recognize people I know when I see them on the street, much less people I don't know. So probably there's people in San Francisco that are famous that are walking around all the time that I walk past that I never recognize. I don't know. So I'm sure I'll recognize Keanu Reeves when he's on stage, because that'll be a big clue.
The applause.
But yeah, the applause will be a big clue. But yeah, that's really all I've been up to this week.
Well, that's quite a bit, although I do love your fascination with mini dachshunds.
Oh my God, they're so cute. The little long-haired miniature dachshunds are just the cutest little things ever. And I would totally buy one or whatever, adopt one, but they are expensive, A, and B, yippee. And I do not want a yippy little dog, no matter how cute it is. And they also are rather energetic and need a lot of attention, and they're very stubborn, and they need training, a lot of training. And that's just not up my alley. So I'm going to pass on getting them miniature dachshunds this time. But I think I'll get a cat next time.
Yeah, I'm hearing you on that. I love our dog. It took a while, right? Because puppies are a lot of work. But now I have a dog that I can say, go pee pee, and he will go outside and go pee, right?
Yay.
But that took training. He didn't come wired that way, right?
Yeah.
How stupid, because I do have to say, I don't have to, right? But I like to continually reinforce that when I say go pee pee, you're urinating, and that's what you're doing. And so that's your clue, right? And so sometimes I'm in the backyard and he's a good 30 feet away, 40 feet away. We have neighbors all around us, and I'm out there going, go pee-pee, go pee-pee, go pee-pee. It's like a fucking idiot. I did the most grandma thing this morning.
Oh, yeah?
Oh, yeah. So while you are busy combing the internet for long-haired dachshunds, which I will say is skating along, Grandma, I went to Lowe's and looked for a metal bucket and with a lid. Right? Because I want to pour birdseed in it to keep this, because the squirrels get into the bags, right? And so I got there like 10 minutes before they opened, and then I was the first person in, right? And there were like 10 employees with nothing to do, and, can we help you? And I was like, no. And I walked all over the fucking store, couldn't find what I was looking for, started to walk out, and the lady saw me, can I help you? Can I help you? And I was like, well, I guess I'm looking for a metal bucket, but with a lid on it, so I could keep the squirrels out of my birdseed. And I'm like, Jesus, Theo, listen to you. She doesn't need to know all of that. And also, that's my concern, right? And that's what I did. Once upon a time, I would have been busy this morning looking for my car, wondering where I had parked it last night, right? Driving home, walk of shame. But now here I am, like up at 5:30 in the morning, taking my pills and going to Lowe's, complaining about squirrels eating my birdseed.
That's cute.
Yeah, well, it's very grandma. And so there we go. Hey, so speaking of time, and grandmas, but let's go back in time. Let's go back in time to the 1940s when Germany invaded Amsterdam, just for no reason at all. Let's go back to that time and talk about our story this week.
All right, let's do that. This is a slightly less cheerful note than birds and birdseed, but we'll talk about it. Yes, that's our topic today. So Amsterdam Mayor Femke Halsema, not sure how she pronounces it, recently issued a formal apology for the city's role in the persecution of Jewish residents during World War II. Speaking at the Hollandse Schouwburg, a former theater used as a collection point for Jews before deportation, she acknowledged that Amsterdam's government actively cooperated with Nazi forces, including mapping Jewish residences, assisting in deportations, and providing trams for transport. Halsema described the city's actions as a moral failure and stated that the municipal apparatus became part of the machinery of evil. She emphasized that the city did not resist the occupiers and failed to protect its Jewish citizens. Of the approximately 80,000 Jews living in Amsterdam before the war, only about 20,000 survived. As part of the apology, Amsterdam has pledged 25 million euros to support Jewish life in the city, with a committee overseeing how the funds will be allocated. The apology comes ahead of the 80th anniversary of Netherlands' liberation from Nazi rule and follows previous acknowledgments of guilt by Dutch institutions, including the National Railway Company and the Protestant Church. And that's what I've got on the topic this week. I don't know if you have anything to add or if we should go into the apology itself.
So I actually have some stuff about the mechanization of the German takeover of Amsterdam.
Oh, cool.
Right? And so I guess we could look at that.
Yeah.
Because it does become, and we could look at that now as opposed to diving into the apology and then backtracking. Because there is that question of like, well, why? Why did it happen? Why did the Dutch government give trams and help assist with all of this? And, the answers are a multitude, but here's a real simplified version of what happened. Let's hear it. So There are parallels, of course, between what's happening in the United States today and what happened in Germany and Austria in the 1920s and 1930s with Hitler coming into power. I'm going to say as a note of hope that the difference between the Nazi takeover of the German government and the Trump regime is that the Nazis followed an economic hardship, the Great Depression. So people were already worn down financially and struggling day to day and ready to try something new, which doesn't excuse people supporting the Nazi movement, but it does help explain why the Nazis were actually able to kind of get a foothold and get people working for them. Okay, so the British and the French had seen what was coming. They understood what was happening in Germany, and they built up stockpiles of weapons a few years in advance of Germany's invasion of Poland. So the Germans and the French were kind of ready for war, gearing up for it. The Dutch had declared neutrality, and they had not beefed up their military. The Dutch owned exactly one tank.
Wow.
I know, right? The Nazis rolled into Holland on May 10th and bombed cities. Rotterdam experienced 20-minute blitzkrieg and lost several city blocks that were decimated to the bombs of the Germans. The Dutch had expected that any German invasion would take months. It took 5 days. On May 15th, the Nazis drove into the capital city courtesy of Mercedes-Benz. Amsterdam held the largest Jewish community in the Netherlands, and on May 15th, so many Jewish people committed suicide that the morgues were overwhelmed with bodies. And I had never heard that piece before. So I wanted just to double check that. And so here's what I've been able to find. In the first days after the invasion, so running May 10th through the 15th, dozens of Jewish people in Amsterdam took their own lives out of fear of what the German occupation would mean. Some estimates suggest around 15 to 20 Jewish individuals committed suicide during the immediate invasion. However, over the course of the entire occupation, there were many more. One well-known case is Femke Halsema, who was a Jewish woman from Amsterdam who did not commit suicide, but left behind moving diaries about the despair that many faced. So just terrible. And then, okay, so obviously just terrible. I know that's a lame thing to say. So then the Germans come in, and what do? Well, the first thing they did was they eliminated competitive media, and any media had to be approved by Germans. They set up a government press division to ensure that all media was friendly to the occupiers. They began banning and burning books. The Germans mailed out pamphlets to all residents explaining what was happening during the course of the occupation. Here we are. This is why we're here. This is what we're doing. Things are going to get good. Isn't it great? Most of the pamphlets were mailed back. The Germans banned all Jewish religious practices and gatherings. All government employees had to send in written declarations. This is starting to sound a little familiar, proving their Aryan. It all sounds familiar because we're living through it right now. All government employees had to send in written declarations proving their Aryan heritage and their commitment to the Nazi cause. Civil servants who were Jewish lost their jobs immediately, and that was true in academia as well. And then the Jews were forced to move into ghettos. Now, the Dutch fought back. There was a big service industry shutdown. So Amsterdam at the time, the political environment there was a socialist movement happening. And again, this was in direct response to the economic situation of the Great Depression. And then there was the normal, I'll just call it, Netherlands government. And the normal Netherlands government wasn't in love with the socialist movement, as you might imagine, but that was gaining some traction. And most of the socialists were service workers, right? And again, we could look at class divides as kind of who's going to be a socialist, who's going to be locked into the traditional political structure, who's got power, who doesn't. So the service industries shut down in protest to the Nazi invasion. There were no buses, there were no waiters, there were no hoteliers, right? Just the workers didn't show. The Germans were shocked, and on the second day of the shutdown, the German SS arrived, and the troops were let loose on protesters. 9 people were shot, and thousands were arrested. through the arrests, the Germans found 20 people they identified as the strike organizers and executed them publicly.
Wow.
Right? The German retaliation against protesters showed anybody that held a differing political view that they were going to have to do things in secret. So basically, the resistance is born. And through that, is that piece of hope that we all have, which is we can resist what's happening in our country by grouping together. And the other benefit that we have today that they did not have in 1942 is we have their experience. History has already shown us how this is going to play out. It's only going to play out one way. It starts one way, it ends one way, right? And it ends by they lose. But it also ends through a lot of turmoil. Hopefully we won't get to that. And I know we're not trying to be too political on the show, but I think that's going to be harder and harder to do as we move forward in time. And so we'll see how things play out is lame, but we do have the benefit of hindsight, and I don't think that we're going to end up in a fascist dictator, authoritarian takeover. I think the Trump regime is blinking and buckling left and right. And so we'll see how things unfold over the course of the next year.
Fingers crossed.
Fingers crossed. We're all going to be fine. It's not going to happen because we know what's coming and we're not going to let it happen. And that's that. We've got that power. Hooray for us.
He does have the lowest approval rating of any president in the last 80 years right now. So that's good.
That's good. The White House Correspondents' Dinner was last night. And as you may know, they capitulated to Trump's temper tantrums and decided that they wouldn't have a comedian. And so they fired Amber Ruffin, whom they had hired, and instead they just gave out awards to themselves last night for heroism in journalism. And I'm not saying those people don't deserve those prizes for talking, war correspondents and people who put their lives on the line, right? But you mean to tell me a room full of people that are willing to put their lives on the line for truth are afraid of a comedian?
Yeah.
Right?
That's disappointing.
It's disappointing. It's gross. It makes me mad at them. Not that I give a fuck one way or the other about the White House Correspondents' Dinner. It's just a big conference for journalists, to work with develop sources and keep their job leads. Because that's, happens at every conference. You go and you have your social network and then you need a job and you find one through your social network of professional. What's the word I'm looking for? I'm struggling for attachments. And then I realized, thank you. That's an even better word. So anyway, yeah. But the resistance has started. Harvard stood up, right? We'll see what happens with the Supreme Court. But people are paying attention, and there is negative press. So it's not going to be an authoritarian takeover. It's going to be what we experienced last time, just stupider. So,
well, your mouth to God's ear. So
every fucking thing I say, except the swear words, he doesn't hear those.
So the apology itself, it was a speech that was several paragraphs long. So I'm not going to read the whole thing, but I will read some of the important parts. It was all important, but I picked out some. And Femke Halsema said, "The inescapable conclusion is that the municipality has failed morally. Never was there a clear no to the occupying forces from City Hall. Services were willing to help implement one anti-Jewish measure after another. Step by step, the municipal apparatus became part of the machinery of evil. Amsterdam Jews who had narrowly escaped that evil were not cherished by their city administration, but were kicked while they were down. When it came down to it, the Amsterdam government was not heroic, not determined, and not merciful, and horribly abandoned its Jewish residents. On behalf of the city administration, I apologize for this. History cannot be undone, but it is our duty to keep the memory of all victims of the Shoah alive, here in this guilty place and at the Holocaust Museum, at the Names Monument, on Dam Square, and at the thousands of Stolpersteine in our city, also as a warning and as a reminder not to look away from contemporary anti-Semitism and all other forms of racism." So you heard a word there that you're probably not familiar with, Stolpersteine. What does that mean? Those are little stones, and the word means in translation stumbling stones or stumbling blocks in English. And they're little concrete cubes with brass plaques that are inscribed with the names and life dates of victims of Nazi persecution. They're put in the pavement in front of the homes where those people last lived before their persecution or their death.
Incredible.
It is nice. It's a nice art movement. So here's how I feel about this apology. I'm obviously not Jewish. Well, not obviously, but I don't know, maybe obviously, I'm not sure. And no one I know was personally killed or imprisoned or persecuted in the Holocaust. And what happened during the Holocaust was of such magnitude and import that I don't feel like I can judge an apology. My first instinct is actually to reject it because no apology can possibly be made for what happened at that time. And at the same time, I think that it's important to acknowledge the crimes and moral failures of the time and at least attempt to make some restitution, even if restitution can never be truly made. So while I do think it's important that these apologies be made, I do not think it's appropriate for me to judge their quality or effectiveness, so I have no rating for this apology today. However, Jewish organizations and community members have responded positively, describing it as a beautiful gesture and a courageous acknowledgement of Amsterdam's moral failures during the Holocaust. What do you think of this apology, Theo?
How could I even follow that? Wow. You're amazing. So one, you're absolutely right. And two, I don't have those qualms. 10 out of 10. And we come to this often when we deal with an organization, a corporation, or a politician who is apologizing for something, right? And and it is true that when you really can't apologize for a horror, right? But I think it is important when organizations, corporations, and politicians, or let's call it a culture, takes a moment and acknowledges publicly, this horrible thing happened and we regret its occurrence. This was bad, because it tells future generations, hey, when somebody shows up in a real snazzy outfit and they've got some nice boots, probably not cool, right? And so it is that, what do we call, stick in the sand, right? Or it's not a line in the sand, but it's a marker. It's a historical marker for future generations to recognize that something bad happened and should not be repeated and should not be forgotten. So marvelous. And then my godfather, Frank, was Jewish. He converted to Christianity when he married my godmother, Dolly. And then over the years, she slowly became Jewish.
Oh, how weird.
I know. Well, she now refers to, well, I don't know about now. We haven't spoken in a few years for no other reason than just time moved on. But she used to refer to herself as a Jewish mother, right? She'd be like, you can't get anything past a Jewish mother. I'd be like, you're Italian Catholic. From Brooklyn.
That's funny.
But from Brooklyn. So, but anyway, yeah. So Frank lost his mom, and his father came over from Austria when Frank was a baby with Frank. And so Frank did lose family in the Holocaust. And that's something that I just grew up with as a part of the background. Right? And it wasn't really ever discussed unless World War II came up, right?
Right.
Which in those days had been only 35 years earlier.
Unbelievable.
Isn't that fucking crazy?
It is.
It's fucking crazy that in 1978, right? Here we are. It was only 35 years ago.
20 years ago.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's less time than the 80s were to now almost.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's crazy to think that, like, this horrible thing happened and now we're going to be buying Mercedes-Benz and Volkswagens 30 years later, right?
Yeah.
But, I mean, some people probably still held a grudge, but whatever on that, I don't have info. And then I have a very self-indulgent story about a resistance fighter, but I think I may have told you this previously, and maybe even on another episode. Does the story of Herbert and Millicent Brill sound familiar? He was shot down over France. We had dinner with them. Oh.
Don't think so.
All right. So let me, my connection to World War II, right? So I was living in Long Beach and I was like in my 20s. And Frank was coming out and we were going to have dinner and he was there on business. And I was living between paychecks and I didn't have any money.
Yeah.
So I went to the bank and I deposited a fake check. I deposited my the tear-off piece from my check that I had deposited the week before into the bank and figured, okay, when I get my next paycheck, I'll just be a wash and I'll just make it even. I just need $40, right?
Oh my God.
Because if Frank knows that I don't have any money, like none, we're going to be having that conversation about how I have to move back to North Carolina. And I don't want to do that. And so I need $40, right? And nobody I knew had any money. It's not like I could have borrowed money from no one had money, right?
Right.
So yeah. And then it turns out the bank didn't love that the following day and they suspended my account. I had a friend that worked at the bank and he waived it for me. So,
oh my God, you're so lucky.
Yeah. I'm very lucky on that front. So, and that was a long time ago. Okay. So all that is to say, Frank came to town and so now I've got cash and it turns out we're having dinner, but we're having dinner with friends of his. And I was like, oh, okay, that's great. So we went to Herbert and Millicent House, and Frank had met them in China when he was working in China as a sociologist. I don't know what he was doing in China. I don't know who he was working for, right? But he was there for like 5 years or so. And Millicent and Dolly had become very close. And so, great, Frank's in town. They're going to have dinner. So we get there, and they've got a beautiful home, and Herb is showing me around the house, and he's pointing at various pieces of art, but he's skipping over all this really magnificent and interesting art, right? These big paintings, like this chair, very kind of Van Gogh, and going to other things and showing me watercolors, etc. And then I said, oh, well, this is all, but tell me about this piece. This is amazing. Mm-hmm. And he was like, oh, well, I did that. And I was like,
oh my God,
wow, this is incredible. Wow. And he was like, yeah, my stuff's been shown in a couple of museums and I sell at a gallery. And, they were living in Newport Beach. So nice. Whatever, he's a couple of little local gallery things. And I was like, wow, that's amazing. And then we sit down and we have dinner, and they had salt and pepper in little bowls with little tiny white porcelain spoons, like Coke spoons for cocaine, but for salt and pepper. I did the most hickish thing. I was like, wow, that's incredible. I've never seen that before. That's really cool. And they were like, it's called salt and pepper. And I was like, wow, gee, shucks, amazing. Just on the table in the open. So anyway, we're talking, they're charming people, right? And then they got into talking about their place in France. And of course, Frank knows them and he knows their history, and I don't, and I'm nosy, and I'm 20 or 22, right? And so I'm like, oh, wow, you have a house in France? That's amazing. And so here's the story. So Herb explains that they bought the house in the town that his plane had been shot over during the war. Now, he's an American, but when the war started, he really felt a call to fight the Germans. So he went over to Britain and he joined the RAF because he could fly, right? And they needed pilots because planes were the new technology, and that's how the war was going to be won, was through air battle, right? So, great. And he's doing his thing, and he's over France, and his plane gets shot down on New Year's Eve, and he crashes. Now, I have an interview that he did, and so I'm going to read this because I think it really just kind of highlights what was going on in the time. This isn't long. On the 31st of December, 1943, along with a large formation, his 10-man crew flew a B-17 bomber out over France with the mission of bombing air bases used by the Germans in the southwest of France. Many bombers were lost on the raid, and Brill, his last name, B-17, was hit by enemy fire over Cognac and was forced to make an emergency landing at Experiment near Montargis in, I'm not even going to pretend to pronounce all these French places. So he gets shot down over France. We'll just say that. The pilot, Lieutenant Coleman Goldstein, managed to land the plane in a field, and all 10 air crewmen survived and torched the plane so it could not be used by the Germans. They decided to split up into groups of 2. 4 headed south and eventually escaped over the Pyrenees into Spain, and 4 were captured by the Germans. Brill teamed up with the crew's engineer, William Weber, and they decided to head east. They took a small break in nearby woods to plan their route and then continued east and covered about 20 miles in 24 hours on foot. It was now New Year's Day, and later that evening, tired and hungry, they walked into a small village to the west of Montmoreau and decided to risk knocking on a villager's door to ask for help. They were in luck. The occupant of the house, after much persuading that they were really Americans, called over a friend who also needed convincing, and the Americans were fed and given beds for the night. And so the French end up smuggling Herb out of France and back to Britain through the underground.
Wow.
Right?
Wow.
Now, he fights with them as well. So they don't just simply escort him. Like, he stays with them for a couple of months. He's considered missing in action and then pops back up in Britain. So later in life, he joins Coca-Cola, becomes a VP, stationed in China, meets Dolly and Frank. Then I'm at this dinner, right, where I don't deserve to be. I had no idea about any of this, because when they told the story, it was just about, the war and the villagers were so wonderful. And so when we had a chance, we decided that we wanted to just buy a house in the village and go there and live there because the villagers are wonderful. And many of the same villagers that had rescued Herbert were still in the village because they're villagers. Wow. And it's the 30s and 40s and 70s, and people just didn't move that much in those days. So they buy the house, and that's great. And time clicks on. And of course, this is pre-internet. And Herb had kept in touch with some of his comrades from the war, right? But different pockets of people wanted to reconnect with other pockets of people. And so what would happen would be, basically, these letter writing communities started to form, and then people would post notices in newspapers. My name is Corporal John Smith, and I was in the B-17. I don't know anything about military stuff, but I was in the squadron in France over these dates in these towns, right? And you offer enough clues about your movements through time and location so that other people who may have been in those locations and those times can connect with you. And they could say, I didn't know you, but did you know Tommy Sullivan from Illinois, right? And just writing letters. And over the decades, these groups started to form and wanted to meet in person. So somebody decided to host the first reunion and did, right? And that ended up becoming, I don't believe it was an annual event, but let's call it like an every 5-year event. And so it was Herbert's time to host. And he's in Newport Beach, right? And this was something that had just happened rather recently because everybody's quite old at this stage in time. And so they secure the Holiday Inn, and no secret, Herb's got some money. And so people who had money would pay for rooms for people who didn't have money, and you'd pay for airfare for people who couldn't afford it. And you would host dinners and things like that. So it was a big collective effort for everybody to get together. I'm not suggesting that Herb funded the whole entire thing, but he shelled out some cash to help make this stuff happen, as did others.
Yeah.
And so people show up and reconnect, and they love it, right? And as Millicent said, Herb is a joiner. He joins everything. The local bird club, the local woodworking shop. If there's a club, Herb's going to join it. Like, great. Millicent, who was beautiful and amazing and everything you would want in like a person to be, was. And so, of course, she speaks French fluently. I don't know her backstory.
Right.
So, because she was just a woman and the wife. So Millicent is there to help the French speakers because, of course, there were French resistance fighters who helped these people, right? And this taxi pulls up. Millicent's at the door because she kind of knows when the French speakers are due to arrive, and she's there to help them get checked in. And this blonde woman shows up who does not speak a ton of English, blondish, older woman. And she says, Oh, hi, you're Madame Brill. I don't know, we're going to call her Genevieve, just for the sake of it. I'm Genevieve Duray. Why not? And here to check in. And, oh, that's great. And, who were you and who did you know? And she said, oh, I worked for the Resistance and I've attend these events whenever I know about them and whenever I can, because I escorted a lot of men through France and I like to see them now and find out what happened to them. And are they happy? Are they married? They got children? What happened with them? And I've kept a list of their names. And she had like a high heel shoe that she had hollowed out the thing and and that's where she kept her list of soldiers that she escorted so that she would never forget their names. Right.
Wow.
And so great story. Right. And I forgot the name I gave her, Genevieve. So Genevieve says to Millicent, yes, and I find some, and some have passed away, and that's sad, but of course, what can you expect at this age? However, one man that I have never found is Captain Tom Smith, and he was someone that I fell in love with, and I have always wondered what happened to him, and it has burned in my heart. And I married a man that I love very much, and I have children that I love very much. But I love Tom Smith, and I want to find him. That's my wish in my old age. My husband has passed, my children are grown, and I want to relive this. And Millicent was like, oh, well, Madame Genevieve, that is such a moving story and so noble. Let us get you checked in, and then meet me down in the lobby, and we'll look through the guest registry with the hotel. So they find out there are 3 Captain John Smiths who are due to arrive, right? And she knows what this guy looks like and what town he's from. She was in love with him. She didn't just fall in love with him because she saw him across the room. Like, they were sleeping in barns together. They were riding in carriages under hay. Like, this was the shit that got you murdered. And these were the people who were willing to die, right? And so the big dinner's that night, and they're walking around and they find the 3 different Captain John Smiths, and the first 2 were not escorted by anybody, right? So they're not the target. We'll use that word, the word. But the 3rd John Smith was, right? And Millicent had advised Genevieve that, like, well, John Smith's a very typical English name, and it's not a surprise there are going to be 3 of them here. And, I hate to dash your hopes before they get too high. And I know you've been doing this for years, but, that doesn't mean he's going to be here just because the name's here. It's very common in English, right? Well, this guy had been shot down. Now, Genevieve didn't speak a lot of English, and so she's giving the clues to Millicent, and Millicent's parroting them to this John Smith. And she's like, are you from Topeka, Kansas? Well, yeah, I am from Topeka, Kansas. And yes, I was shot down. And yes, I was escorted through France by a beautiful French girl. But, this woman is very nice, but she does not look like the girl that escorted me at all. I don't recognize her. So I can't say that I am that man, although those are a lot of my details. And he said, the girl that I knew was very blonde. And Millicent turned to Genevieve and said in French, Madame, were you ever blonde? And Genevieve says, of course, but as I am now, and flicks her hair, right? So it was her. And they had a marvelous little reunion, and Millicent got to interpret for both of them. And so John Smith had gotten married, had children, was very happy, had never forgotten the beautiful girl that saved his life, and was so pleased to know that she had had a happy marriage and life as well. But his wife was still alive, basically. And I don't know how the evening ended, and I didn't think to ask then. And that's kind of the story, right?
Oh my gosh.
But yeah, and I'm going to say 100% true because 1, why would I lie? But 2, one of those stories that just stuck with me. I mean, it was so incredible. I can remember everything about that night. But the thing that impressed me most was their son was the drummer for Berlin.
Oh, really?
Yeah. I mean, fuck getting shot down over France. Your son's a drummer for Berlin? That's cool.
Wow.
Does he know Terry Nunn? Yeah, she's married to a dentist now. She doesn't really want anything to do with singing. Like, wow, that's amazing. I think she's living in Kansas, speaking of that. But yeah, and so, I just love those stories from that time, and in particular, stories around the resistance. Who knew?
Wow, amazing.
Yes.
We don't have to relive those times. As romantic as some of that might sound now, it must have been hell to live through, and I hope we don't have to go through any of that again.
We are not going to have to go through any of that again. And again, to the point,
Good.
We know what's coming, and we came out of a boom time. So we're going to be going from a boom time into a hard time, and current administrations, fairly or unfairly, and in this instance, fairly, get blamed for the economy, right?
Hopefully. I hope so.
Oh,
Fingers
only.
crossed, like I said before.
Only.
Yeah.
Yes. So we are going to be fine.
Okay.
And on that note, do you have who's sorry now or apology expected?
I have a who's sorry now, and it's me because I don't have a who's sorry now.
Oh, okay, cool. Well, I have had many. I've done a lot of talking in this policy. Oh, and then I have had many in the past. My apology expected is going to be from the White House Correspondents' Dinner. And I think that after they see how the public feels about what happened at the event, and what chicken shits they look like, it won't be repeated. There's a great article in Vanity Fair that I have lost. So I'll just say Google Vanity Fair White House Correspondents' Dinner, and they did a great takedown of why it was a chicken shit move and how it was just kind of a boring dinner. And they lost the plot, to use a Gen Z term. I think that's Gen Z.
Yeah.
And so, the point is not to shit all over the presidency, but the point is to speak truth to power. And they did not last night. And they need to apologize for that.
Amen.
And amen. March forward, Theo, and raise the troops up and have no fear. I will.
Very good. Well, I think that's it for us this week. Some positive notes, some depressing notes, but overall, I think we have hope for the future. So we have carried on, and we will carry on with courage and strength. And on that note, don't trip potato chips.
And stay cool, cucumbers. You tricked me. That's the better line.
Bye,
the potato
everybody.
chip line is the better line. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to Apologies Accepted, the podcast.
You can find links to the articles and the sources in the show notes.
To submit an apology or find out more, visit us at apologiesaccepted.net, where you can also find our merchandise.
We're on Twitter at Apologies Accepted.
And on Instagram at apologies.accepted.
You can support our important work at Patreon.com/Apologies Accepted.
And fuck Facebook.
Bye.
Bye.